Hi, good evening, and welcome to our Connect series. Let's talk about the impact of isolation and loneliness. My name is Maxine Douglas. I am the National Social Action Director for the Church of God of Prophecy, and it's wonderful to be your host tonight. So, welcome. It's great that you decided to join us this evening. So, a warm welcome to those of you that are connecting either by Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, or perhaps even via our website. Thank you for joining us and choosing to be with us this evening. And tonight we've chosen to highlight the issue and impact of social isolation resulting in loneliness. And I suppose the other health risks that are associated with loneliness. Society describes loneliness as the latest epidemic. I don't know if you agree with that statement or not, but perhaps later on in the series we'll unpick that a little bit more. In my mind, an epidemic is something described as a widespread occurrence of disease in a country or in a particular time. So it tells me that society thinks that we're in a bit of a storm. What we're seeing now is a raising concern around isolation and loneliness, and it wouldn't surprise me that the numbers are growing, especially since COVID-19 and the various lockdowns. But more on that later now. But it's my pleasure to introduce to you my co-host, so I'm not here on my own. I have an inspiring leader in her generation. Her energy and outlook in life for a young adult is truly inspirational. Her light just radiates when she challenges, her peers and also the adults to be the best versions of themselves. So I'd like to introduce you to my co-host. Her name is Cheyenne. Good evening, Cheyenne, and thank you so much for agreeing to host with me this evening.
Thank you, Pastor Maxine, for that introduction. And I'd like to say good evening to everyone and a warm welcome to all our viewers and to our incredible guests. Tonight features a discussion that you do not want to miss. We all know someone, or perhaps have even experienced firsthand what it feels like to be lonely. And I would agree with you, Pastor Maxine, that the pandemic gave nearly everyone a taste of loneliness. And even young people lost months of normal social interaction, and some are still feeling that effects to this day. And I don't want to ignore or forget young people in this discussion, as I read that sometime during the pandemic, over half of the young people aged up to 25 reported being lonely very frequently, almost all the time, compared to less than 30% aged over 50. So that includes uni students who that is like the time of exploring who you are and figuring out what you want to do in your life. But having that stripped away from you may have changed their mindset or even their overall sense of purpose and belonging. But we all get a little lonely sometimes, while we might feel completely alone in those moments and like no one can understand how we feel. But that's the furthest away from the truth. But it's an honour for me to be here and offer a young person's perspective on this discussion. But for now, I would like to introduce our guests for this evening, Angela Clark and Michelle Johnson. Over to you, Sister Angela.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here on my first Women Connect series. I'm looking forward to sharing, hearing, and the knowledge and I'm sure inspiration that I'll get from this. So it's great to be here. Thank you. Over to Michelle Johnson.
Hello, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure. It's a privilege, actually, to spend the next hour and a half or so with you, talking on this very important topic. And so I look forward to that discussion. Over to Cheyenne.
Thank you to our guests for their introduction, and we're looking forward to hear from you later. But Angela and Michelle are not strangers to this platform. However, I would like to share a little bit more about them. So, Sister Angela is a qualified psychologist and psychotherapist with over 30 years of experience as a clinical with clinician. Sorry, guys. With the thank you, with the adult health and social care sector. As Head of Service in Adult Health and Social Care, Angela oversees care and supports provision on behalf of a local authority. Angela's therapeutic background extends across the NHS, local government, and in private practice since 2006. She holds a master's degree in counselling and psychotherapy and an honours degree in psychology and sociology, and has undertaken much of her postgraduate training through the Priory Hospital. Angela obtained her first diploma at the Gestalt Centre in London and went to study person-centred counselling at Metonia. Angela is passionate about the empowerment and equipping of young people and has been for many years involved in provision of counselling in schools. She has been involved at a high level with young projects, local government and community action initiatives aimed at improving the lives of young people by sitting on the children and adult safeguarding boards. Rafa International Development Agency is a charity arm of the Church of God of Prophecy and as the CEO for Rafa, Angela's work takes her across the country raising awareness on behalf of the organisations like British Heart Foundation, NHSBT and more. Rafa provides information, support and advice to social action groups across the UK and internationally. And just to introduce Michelle Johnson as well, Michelle has begun her health service career in nursing, gaining experience in private sector and NHS in senior nursing roles, spanning research and a number of clinical settings. She co-authored 11 research papers in cancer genetics during her last clinical/research role was specialist nurse in genetic gynecological cancer. A key component of this role involved counselling, supporting and advising women on the management of their genetic risk of cancer. After 10 years in this role, Michelle then transitioned into NHS commissioning, working in communications and engaging in as Croydon Clinical Commission Group, also known as CCG, then Kingston CGG, as Equity and Engagement Lead. She is currently the Head of Communications and Engagement for the NHS Brent CCG. Michelle has extended experience of working with a range of charities in her most recent roles in NHS. She has been an active member of the Chief Nursing Officer Strategic Advisory Group for approximately 10 years, leading on to communications for the group for 2 years. Michelle is a qualified coach and the author of Do Great Exploits, which provides motivation to keep reaching to achieve personal and professional goals and to create a life of fulfillment and impact. Michelle has been a radio broadcaster for 4 years, hosting talk shows on women's issues and broader topics affecting the Black community. She served for 2 years as a trustee and Treasurer's Foundation. So after that long, lovely bio from both of our guests, I hope that you guys are prepared as much as I am to hear from them later. But for now, I would like to show you a little video about loneliness and that it discusses our topic, just to give you a bit more insight.
Here's the shocking truth about loneliness. This is why we need to take it more seriously. Surveys show 1 out of 3 adults are lonely, and the health impacts of loneliness are shocking. Studies have shown that people who are lonely are 50% more likely to die before their time. Researchers show that loneliness is as damaging to our health as not smoking 1, not 2, but 15 cigarettes per day. Only around half of Americans say they have meaningful face-to-face interactions with a loved one, family, or friend every single day. Members of Generation Z say they are the loneliest generation and experience more health problems as a result of it. Loneliness was also linked with less physical activity, compulsive use of digital technology, and not being able to share our problems with others. In a study of 20,000 adults, 54% say that they don't know one person that knows them well. Additionally, 56% of people said that the people they surround themselves with are not necessarily with them. And approximately 40% said that they lack companionship, don't have meaningful relationships, and feel isolated. All of us have been in a crowd but felt lonely. All of us have been invited to a party but wanted to leave. All of us have likes on social media but don't feel loved in real life. So many of us can get comments on our posts but can't get a friend to call us back. Loneliness is real. So here's what we have to do. After studying over 2,500 consumers over 6 years, research found that people that see material possessions as a sign of success felt more lonely. Investing our money in experience rather than things is a great way of breaking the loneliness and materialism cycle. Schedule a time each day to talk to a friend. Take a class to learn something new. Volunteer to deepen your sense of purpose. Spend time with people who look more like your future than your past. The mental health charity Mind cites 2 factors that can cause loneliness. Someone either not having enough social contact or, more interestingly, being surrounded by people but not feeling understood, loved, or cared for. Notice, it's not just being around people, but being understood. It's not just being invited and present, but feeling like you're contributing. Loneliness really comes then from a lack of significance or lack of worth and what you bring to the table and what value you truly offer. Lonely is not being alone. It's the feeling that no one loves you. So start by loving yourself.
Wow. That was a very, very powerful video. Loneliness is real. Many of us may be in a real great place, but there are many people in our society that are not. Good evening and welcome again to our viewers, and thank you so much, Cheyenne, for reading out those bios. Bit cruel of me, wasn't it, just to get you to read them both out, but I'm sure you will pay me back another time. So today I really feel that I just want to throw out a caveat here. The information that we share this evening is not medical advice. We may be sharing some research, we may be sharing some experience, some lived experience on this topic. So if something that you hear this evening sparks a thought, a concern, a worry, then please seek medical support from your GP. Or perhaps you may want to speak to a trusted friend, a pastor, a colleague that may be able to help. But nevertheless, if you're feeling concerned, please do call somebody and talk to somebody. So this takes me nicely on to our discussion, and I really wanted to kind of throw out the first question to one of our guests, Sister Angela. So, Sister Angela, when we talk and think about social isolation and loneliness, what does it really look like? Can you help us to kind of unpick that?
Yes, loneliness and social isolation, although they are different, but they are very much related. So when it comes to loneliness, loneliness is a feeling, a distressing feeling, as if you are on your own, and it is a definite feeling. Isolation is different in that you can remove yourself. You can feel isolated, but you can also remove yourself. You can isolate yourself. And if I use an example, for example, like how we do in society, for example, if you're going to chastise a child, for example, you're going to say, go to your room. What you're doing is you're getting that child away. They're isolating, getting them isolated. Now, for me, if I'm saying go to your room, I'm not only just saying go to your room. I'm taking Xbox, whatever, everything that's going to entertain you. I want you to be by yourself. So that's the bit that it was relating. So you can be lonely, and that brings for different feelings. It actually brings physical feelings. You feel lonely, but you can be isolated and also feel isolated. But one of them is objective and one of them is subjective. So the loneliness is the feeling of being alone, and it's distressing, because if you haven't got anyone to talk to, it's the frequency and the the frequency and also the quantity of the interaction that you have. So if you don't have that interaction or that regular interaction, then that's what causes the feeling of loneliness. And then from that, it will have an effect that people can naturally just isolate themselves because that's what they're used to. So they don't go out and push themselves to interact with people. They just retreat. I hope
Yeah, I
that's
hear
clear.
that. Yeah, it is very clear. And as the video alluded, that sense of feeling of not being loved.
Hmm.
What do you think, Michelle? Is there anything that you want to contribute towards that? What does it look like? Because I mean, it's easy to talk these words, but if I was to approach somebody or be in an arena with somebody, how would I see the signs and symptoms that that person may be feeling lonely, perhaps?
Well, I thought that video was really, really quite powerful as well. You mentioned that at the start, and it so happens that he drew a lot from the Mind website actually, and I did visit that website to prepare for today, and I actually like their definition of loneliness. Just to add to Angela's, basically they describe it as loneliness as a feeling we have when our need for social contact and relationships isn't met. So that's a very simple definition of loneliness, but I think it is spot on. It's that sense that our need for social interaction, social connection, and relationships isn't met. So we have a need, as we all know, we need relationship, we need connection, we need community, and so people who experience this loneliness feel disconnected from that from relationships, from community,
Mm,
and so in terms of, and you're quite right. So it's not just um, having lots of people around you, but you can still be lonely in that environment where there's lots of hustle and bustle and people around you. You might even be at a party, as the film said, but feel lonely. And it goes back to that sense of, well, in terms of relationship and social contact, what people need is um, feeling understood, feeling loved, feeling valued for who
yeah,
you are in
yeah,
that crowd or in that group, as opposed to just being in the group. It's a sense of the connection comes when the people in the group or some other person in that group knows you for who you are,
yeah.
and is interested in you and sees your value, or you are valuable to them, you're of value to them. And so that is so there's that connection on two levels. You can be in a crowd and that's comfortable enough for some people, but the loneliness could still be there because actually nobody in that crowd really knows you, and it's a very superficial level of interaction and the like. And I suppose in terms of your question around what it might look like, well, it might be difficult because, we're in a world today where everybody knows how to pose. Everybody knows how to, we're all wearing masks all the
Oh yeah.
time, right? And because of social media as well. And masks are not universally unhealthy, but certainly they're not helpful if you are lonely, but you put on a mask of feeling quite um, content and loved and happy and joyful, when actually you're feeling miserable and lonely and isolated. So it's difficult sometimes to tell just by looking at somebody if they're really lonely or not because they're acting
Sure.
in a way to hide that. But I guess if someone was really open about it, you might find that the person um, might be looking a little downcast. Who knows? A bit downcast.
Mm,
Um, that might be the first thing that makes you think, oh, let me reach out to that person to find out what's going on with them. But I think that might be the only thing that might indicate somebody's lonely is if they're feeling down, if they look downcast.
yeah,
Not something
yeah.
you can
Thank you.
see. So, mm,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But we always often tend to want to look at signs and symptoms, don't we, to really kind of gauge where people are at. But how did you feel when you listened to the video when it referred to the health risks that were associated with isolation and loneliness? And was that a surprise to you? And who are the most at risk from significant health risks in terms of social isolation and loneliness, do you think?
Shall
If
I
I
take
ask
that,
you,
Angela?
Angela. Oh, yeah, yeah,
uh,
Michelle, that's fine, yeah.
You can, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'll start off.
Yeah.
So yes, it is quite shocking, really, to hear, because I think most people wouldn't necessarily link loneliness to having any physical impact, really, let alone serious long-term conditions, and even death. In fact, loneliness can be linked to death, to early mortality. So,
Yeah.
but some of the health risks that we know of that are associated with loneliness are both physical as well as mental. So, some of the physical ones are increased risk of high blood pressure, increased risk of heart disease and stroke,
Mm,
obesity, um, anxiety and depression is the mental health side of things. Cognitive decline is interesting, and Alzheimer's disease is also have strong links with loneliness. Um, and really, it kind of makes sense when you start to think about it, because if you are feeling lonely and disconnected socially, you're less likely to be active and out and about. Over time, it talks about your self esteem actually um, depleting, and your confidence along with it. So that's where Angela mentioned the isolation bit of it. So people might become more isolated because as you feel lonely, you withdraw more and more, and then you lose your
mm,
confidence and your self esteem, and it gets into this cycle. And then you're not as active. So you start to perhaps put on a bit of weight because you're comfort eating more than you might normally be comfort eating, and you're less active as a result. So you're dependent, as the film said, become dependent on devices, television. So you're sitting in front of the TV, or you're sitting with your phone, or
mm,
your iPad, or whatever it is, and you're not moving. So you start to put on weight, and you're grazing and you're comfort eating. And we know that, increased weight, increased body mass index leads to is an indicator for heart disease and hypertension and all those other
Sure.
things, right? So
Yeah.
that's how that cycle comes into place, really.
mm.
Yeah.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
interesting. It was interesting that in the last week we heard about the singer Sinead O'Connor, who took her own life. And she had a history of mental illness, and from what I understand, was very isolated. She isolated herself. She withdrew, and eventually took her own life this week. But and I understand, as I say, that she had a history of mental illness, but that caused her to withdraw and to retreat and to disengage with society.
Mm.
So that so there it can cause so many different things from a health perspective, and that's when you talk about chronic isolation, when it gets to the stage where it actually causes you to harm yourself, in fact.
Mm.
Yeah.
I
Good
thought it's
point.
interesting as well that cognitive decline is also listed as a risk of
Yeah.
loneliness, cognitive
Yes.
decline and into
Down.
Alzheimer's. And I guess, again, it's because of the isolation,
Yes.
and just not using the skills you have in terms of interacting and thinking
Mm,
and being out and about and making decisions and using your mind in that. So you begin
mm,
to decline cognitively as well as a result of something that started off as loneliness, which leads
mm,
to isolation. Like,
Yeah.
and you were asking as well, Maxine, about who is at greater risk of loneliness. So I mean, the film told us, which is startling, that young people are at risk. It
mm,
quoted a quite significant number. I think it was, Cheyenne might remember. Was it 50% or something like that? Um, I think previously we would have thought it would be in the older population. As people become widows or widowers, um, um, you would see that isolation, that loneliness more. So it exists there, but actually it exists in the younger generation. The other bit that it exists that you guys might be aware of or not, I don't know. I'm an immigrant here, so I've lived here for 30 odd years, but I'm an immigrant, and
mm,
which means that I moved to a country where I didn't have family,
Sure.
and I had to literally start to build relationships when I moved here. And those relationships change over time because people have moved on to the States, to other parts of the country. You lose touch with your friends. And so, as an immigrant, I'm actually finding that I have to continually be looking to build new friendships, new connections all the time with people. Um, And so loneliness somebody who's an immigrant, there's an increased risk of loneliness for that reason. And so there are many reasons why people, different groups of people that you won't expect are actually at risk of isolation in
Sure.
2023. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I see that now. So Cheyenne, can I just quickly ask you, when you saw the video, did you find it quite surprising that they linked it with health and linked it with, I think they said smoking more than 5 cigarettes a day or something like that? Was that a surprise to you?
Not necessarily, actually. I feel like definitely a lot of people have a lot of different coping mechanisms to deal with things differently, and I think stuff like smoking, especially now, more so like vaping and stuff, has become more popular, and that has a lot of, I guess, like stressful chemicals in it. So, and it wasn't a surprise to me, to be honest.
Yeah, because it's remarkable how much we, how we feel and our moods can actually, how it's internalized in us in terms of our health, which I was quite surprised by it, to be honest with you. So if I go and ask about, as a result of grief, I know we've talked about loneliness and social isolation, but what could somebody do if they're feeling lonely as a result of grief, or maybe that they're still in that position of mourning, or even as you tapped into, Michelle, maybe going through slight levels of depression? What can somebody do?
It's difficult. Because sometimes you don't recognize the situation when you're in it. You don't people don't necessarily deliberately choose to be lonely or choose to isolate themselves, but it's because of the situation they find themselves in, especially when it comes to things like bereavement, depression. Because they experience some kind of traumatic um, situation or episode. Our bodies naturally, our bodies will react, and people will react differently. So one person's way of dealing with it, for example, may be to just continuously keep going, and it's like almost like a defense mechanism. So they heighten their work, or they keep going, they keep going to work, doing excessive hours, those kind of things, so that takes their mind off it. But other people deal with things differently. They will retreat. Um, you say, what can we do about it? Not everyone can talk about how they feel. So sometimes when you go through a situation, and COVID is quite a good example, because what Cheyenne said was, during COVID, people experienced isolation. I think what COVID did was it actually magnified the fact that there was always been isolation, but because we were forced into a situation of isolating from others, it magnified it, and the way that people coped with it also was different. There were some people I know, even at work, there were some people that loved the fact that you had to work from home and, distance yourself from others. And
Mm,
they were quite happy with that. Whereas other people found it difficult not coming into an office and having that kind of social interaction and exchange every day. And it wasn't the same as being on a phone with someone or being on Teams or Zoom. It was actually that physical, that actual physical interaction of being with someone in a room, being able to to talk, to laugh, to joke, and have that kind of
yeah.
sense of connection. Whereas
Mm,
being in front of a screen and having to look at a screen, and and dealing with it, it didn't suit everyone. It did. And for those who were already experiencing isolation or depression, it actually exacerbated the problem. And not everyone was comfortable about talking about it. And maybe we
yeah.
didn't talk about it because it was almost as if it became the norm for everyone.
Yeah. And it was acceptable, wasn't it? So yeah, I hear you and I get you, and I think that's what leads to trauma. I know that there was a story of a young girl that couldn't cope with the fact that she was disconnected from her friends,
Hmm.
from school. You know, that was her lifeline. She needed to have that connectivity. And then, you know, for one reason or another, the mother withdrew the phone from her. And we'll talk about social media a little bit later on. And it was traumatic for that individual, absolutely traumatic. And I think if you don't recognize the impact of social isolation in terms of um, being a traumatic event for you, you would actually just think that that individual was just being selfish and didn't know what they were doing, and you'd come up with so much different narratives about why that young person really had a complete and utter meltdown, and it was all stemmed to that disconnect. So the social isolation disconnect, and the fact that they couldn't speak to friends and they could not engage and see them. And I don't know about you, Cheyenne, whether or not you were one of these types of people during the pandemic. Was, as Angela said, were you happy to be on your own, and we were glad to be working from home, or did you actually miss that social isolation, that connectivity with your friends?
I think for me, I feel like I'm a bit of a weird person because I think like I am a social person. I do like being around people, but I also do enjoy my own company. So I think having that period was for me it was like a lot of self-reflection, to be honest, at that point. So it wasn't as bad as I think I handled that situation very differently to a lot of my peers because I have other friends who are very social, so they struggled a lot. But, I was able to balance it out, but I think like we'll speak about technology obviously later, but I think having that pathway to still talk to people probably helped a lot of people and that probably wasn't really talked about a lot as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. So, Michelle, you know, in terms of trauma, and it won't leave me really, Angela, your comment about sometimes the impact of things that happen into our lives can cause trauma, and we don't really recognize it, do we, as individuals? So the impact of trauma um, that can lead us into social isolation and loneliness can be vast, can't it?
Definitely.
I think so, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think so. There's lots of reasons that cause trauma to people.
Hmm.
And, you know, if it's unresolved and it's not dealt with, then it will have sort of far-reaching impacts, as Angela will be better
Mm.
placed to tell us as a psychologist on the call.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to see how trauma could lead to people feeling less confident or less even willing in themselves to engage, feeling
Mm.
a sense of hopelessness or feeling a sense of, you know, why bother, which then leads to them becoming isolated, and then losing their
Mm.
confidence to interact with other people. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm. And you're right because you know it's the self worth and that gets questioned then, and then you
Mm.
start doubting yourself and then you start retreating almost into yourself so that the actual speaking, that if you can't find your voice anymore, you then stop speaking and
Mm.
internalizing your feelings. And when that happens, as I say, it's loneliness is not something that you can necessarily see. You don't have a badge that and it
Mm.
can it can become an illness, because that's
Yeah.
what leads to things like depression. That's what leads to things like loss of appetite, those physical things, and in the same way that Michelle, you said that people may eat, excessively, but some people may just lose
Mm.
their appetite and not eat at all. Some people, it does affect your behavior. It affects your moods. You know, you may have mood swings and things, and those things you can't see, which is why you can sit in a room full of people and no one notice the fact that you feel lonely or you feel isolated. And that thing that you talk about with regards to trauma, what that pandemic period did is not take account of the fact that people's living conditions are very, very different. So
Yeah.
some people
Yeah.
going
Good
to
point.
work, going to school, took them away from traumatic situations. But then when you're forced to remain in a situation, and that's when you say, well, that's what you said, Michelle, about when it's unresolved. When it's unresolved and not dealt with, and you're actually forced into a situation that you can't get out of, you then actually, as I say, you then retreat into yourself and distance yourself even more. Your feelings, you just turn yourself inwards almost, and that's a hard place to be. That's the feeling of loneliness, when you actually don't feel as if you can engage with someone. You don't feel as if you can tell someone how you feel, and talking is so important, because I like you said here, let's talk about it. That's the hardest thing for some people sometimes, when they feel lonely. They find it difficult to talk about it because they don't necessarily understand it themselves, and because it may be connected to something else. It may be connected to a traumatic issue. It may be connected to something like a road traffic accident, for example. You may have a road traffic accident, and after that, it changes your whole being. You don't want to drive again. You don't want to go out. You want to
Sure.
stay in the house. You want to feel safe. That place that is supposed to be your sanctuary almost then becomes your prison, because you don't feel like you can. You don't want to let anybody in, and you don't want to come out. And that's a difficult situation to deal with when you're in it, because you don't see it necessarily for what it is. You're just It's like the fight or flight. You're dealing with it in the way that you feel best. You're kind of desensitizing yourself to deal with that situation.
Yeah, great points there. Thank you. Yeah.
Just want to add another example of where people can be in find themselves lonely is in marriages. So again, loneliness shows up where you least expect it. And often many people feel quite lonely despite being married, despite having close relatives around them or whatever it is. But it comes back to that place again of feeling misunderstood, or feeling like my husband or my wife doesn't understand me for who I am, and then they feel less connected to that person and feel quite lonely, even though they're in a marriage and in a relationship. And I guess, coming, if we're talking about the church context, there's so many things that go on beneath the surface that we just don't know, because again, everybody presents in a particular way, don't they, when they come through the church door. But you don't really know what is actually going on beneath the smile and beneath the
Yeah.
everybody's expected to have a smiley face once you get into church, but you might not actually be feeling like smiling at all, because your world is just in ruins. And that is
Yeah.
loneliness, because you can't express yourself in the place where you should feel quite safe to do so.
And you're
Yeah,
right. You're
great
right,
point.
Michelle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just say that that's a good point,
Yeah.
because again, also, I don't think we the being in a position of leadership, whether it be at work, or whether it be within the church, that can be a very isolating place to be. But we don't want to talk
Yeah.
about it. But it can be very isolating, because there is so much expectation on you, and and you're expected to be a certain person. You're not expected to be depressed, and you're not expected, because you're the one that everybody's looking to. So if you're the one that everybody's looking to, you have to, as you say, Michelle, have that smile, have that service to give everyone. You've got to have that word. You've got to have and even when it comes to marriages, irrespective of what your marriage is like or whatever, you still have to give that positive, that positive and uplifting um, support, irrespective of what you're going through. And that in itself can be isolating. And that's why they're saying that there are different types of loneliness. And that's just one
Yeah.
example. And I'm glad the fact that you raised it about the church environment, because, sometimes we can not deliberately mask it, but it can be masked by the fact that there is so much busyness. And in
Yeah.
that busyness, there is so much isolation and so much
Yeah.
loneliness, but nevertheless, we keep busy, you know?
Yeah. So valid points, and I like the idea of being maybe in a crowd, but being alone, just feeling
Mhm.
alone, being in a marriage and feeling alone, being part of a family and feeling alone. and that's quite profound, really. And I just wanted to consider whether or not, would we say that the statements that are out there in society that talks about the epidemic of loneliness and isolation, would we say that we're in that space?
As a society, you mean, or when
As a
talking to
society, yeah, I read in the World Health Organization, and I think I read somewhere else that they referred it to an epidemic. So not a, not an issue, not a concern, not a crisis. They're talking about an epidemic, and we know that we get an epidemic before we get something like a pandemic. So it's a progression into something if we don't do something about it, if we don't recognize it, if we don't raise awareness of it. But in especially with you, Sister Angela, in the field that you work in,
Mhm.
what would your comment be regarding that statement?
There's a few things I would say. I mean, there are some statistics, and I think I'm going to refer to it because I don't want to get it wrong. But last year, there was a review, and I think it was 49, nearly 50% of adults, and that amounted to 20, almost 26 million people in the UK reported as feeling lonely, whether it be occasionally, sometimes, or often. So that's nearly 50% of this
Wow.
country. Yeah, so that's profound. Yeah. Now, when I it's and particularly the UK, the government have recognised that there is an issue with loneliness, and I think as following that, there is a strategy that they've put in place, and I think there's also a minister. So there is actually a minister who is specifically there to look at loneliness. So they already see that it's an issue. Certainly, from my perspective of working in health, and social care particularly, what I see is the loneliness of the older generation and how they're impacted by it, because of the way that we now live, where our families
Mm,
are not just on the corner anymore. You know, um, that people are living. It's not unusual for people to live 200 miles away from their parents, or you don't necessarily have regular
mm,
interaction with people, and many people live on their own, and those who receive care for example, I know lots of people who the only people who they see on a given day is a person who comes in to maybe give them their medication, or a district nurse
mm.
who comes in to provide insulin and things like that. So it is
Yeah.
something that it is. And also, conversely, with regards to Cheyenne's generation and the young, yes, definitely. The use of social media, the phones, the even the X no, not Xboxes, but PS PS machines.
Yeah. Yeah.
The young people use that as their social interaction. They're in their bedroom, but they're playing games with people across the world, but they're still
Mm,
in their bedroom, and parents
yeah.
are getting concerned.
Yeah.
And that's not true
Absolutely.
interaction. That's not true relationship. Playing games with people around the
No,
world. That's not
not
real.
at all.
That's not
Not at all.
a relationship, is it?
No, not at all.
So I would
No.
say
No.
yes, there is an epidemic. I mean, if you're talking 50%, as Angela just said, surely if that's
That's
not an epidemic, I don't know what is, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um,
It's stark, isn't it, when you hear those kind of percentiles, and very worrying. I didn't know that. I didn't appreciate that.
mm, it's huge.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. So I think Cheyenne's got a fair few questions that she wants to pose at you, but I'm just concerned that if there is prolonged loneliness, and it's left unchallenged, unsupported, um, and if we overlook it, and if we ourselves minimize it, so if it was myself, if I minimize that, that's the space that I'm in, what more, or what are the potential associated risks that could come along with it. And I think, Michelle, you alluded to some of it to start off with. And I say this to say what I'm going to say now. When my father passed away 13 years ago, I saw my mother not grieve. You know, she's a woman of faith, and she was sad and she was lonely and she mourned. She went through that process. But I felt that she started to go through this space of feeling alone. And even if she went to church, um, and that was great, it broke a cycle, but then she'd come back into a space of loneliness, and and therefore her environment avoided her from coming out of that space. Her environment dictated that that's what she would be. She would be lonely all the time. And I say that if we don't recognize it, one for ourselves and one for others, then potentially you could see maybe some of our elders and even some of our young people declining in health, mental health. I think, Michelle, you alluded to maybe going into, early dementia or loss of memory, whatever that cycle is. I just think that what could we do as individuals to understand how we can help and support others that may be going through that journey?
Could I give an example, like a personal example of what I experienced with my mother? My mum lived in the States for a very long time with my stepfather, and when he died, as a family, we were really quite concerned about her because she was in the house on her own. It was quite a huge house, and we were concerned about how she was going to cope. And we thought that what we would do is put cameras in there just so that we could keep an eye on her, just to make sure that she was okay. And I remember just checking on her while I was at work, because I could use my phone and just see what she was doing. But for me, it was actually soul destroying. It was soul destroying just watching her, just pacing from room to room, meaninglessly, really. Just and I could see that she was just looking for things to do. And then sometime after that, when my brother got ill with cancer, and she got the news, I saw a very rapid decline in her mental health. And we could see, even just watching her movements, how her behavior changed. And then her moods changed. And she wouldn't go out because she used to go out and she used to do really, she was very a social animal. She used to go out bingoing, she'd do different things, go to the clubs that they had there for the over 70s. And she was, but she stopped doing those things. And her behavior changed so much and her mental health deteriorated so much so that I had to bring her, I went and got her and brought her back here so that I could take care of her. But by the time I had done that, when I had to take her to the doctors to really find out what was happening, they told me that, because I thought it was dementia. I actually thought that she had dementia, that what was happening. But they told me that actually it wasn't dementia, that she had depressive psychosis. And they felt that the depressive psychosis had been brought on because of the trauma of her son having cancer and then eventually passing away. And so, and it was, for me, as I said, it was soul destroying for me because I watched I felt like I watched the decline and saw the decline. And that bit was very rapid, in that she had been with, my stepfather for like over 25 years, and suddenly she was on her own. And there was no, and there was no one there. And that caused the physical, initially the physical, and then the mental effects on her.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Sister Angela. Very personal experience. I'm really grateful. And hopefully hearing what you've shared will help somebody else. And it is true. my mother went through something similar, and lost two children within 2 months, and it impacted her incredibly. So we shouldn't lose sight on the trauma or the shock that
Yeah.
can affect individuals. What do you think, Michelle?
So I agree with you. And sometimes we might see some of these situations as a kind of a, well, that's life, that's the natural thing. Somebody's died, so of course somebody's traumatized. But perhaps it is an opportunity to actually connect that person with some professional support to
Yeah.
talk through, if it's an extraordinary circumstance like two children in 2 months, that's not normal.
Mm.
That's not, it's hard enough to lose one child. If you're going to lose a second child in a short space of time, that's not a normal occurrence. And so the
Mm.
normal coping skills wouldn't hold a lot of water against a
Sure.
trauma like that. So this is not to criticize you or anything. I'm just saying as an example, if we look at something that's an extraordinary event, then actually probably as an Afro-Caribbean community, we just kind of think, oh, we just have to get on with it. But
Mm.
we actually need to step out of that thinking and think, actually, it's worth me going and having a talk with a psychologist or a counselor, or getting my
Mm.
mom or my dad or somebody to talk through this phase of their life until they feel, it's kind of resolved in a way, it's unknotted, or they can get back to a sort of level of coping that is
Yeah.
more normal. There are times when mental health, we just kind of glaze over the mental health issue, don't we? We will tend to
Yeah.
somebody's needs. If they have a broken arm, or if mom fell down, definitely we'll be all on that.
Mm.
you know
Yeah. Yeah.
but actually, if mom has lost two children, if mom has lost her husband and a child, or if something, as I say, that's really out of the ordinary happens, it's just a hug and a kiss, and yes, we're feeling sorry and all that stuff, but that does not help. That does not
No.
fix the problem that's
Mm.
beyond normal.
No.
So it's maybe just a
No.
Mm.
thought for us, really, to think about, if something definitely out of the ordinary happens, then it is worth seeking help. It is worth seeking some extra support for the family
Mm.
members or whoever it is that's involved, so it doesn't exacerbate, it doesn't sit there and fester with the
Sure.
Mm.
person, for the person,
Sure.
really.
Sure. Sure. And
Uh,
and also with it, in addition to that, it's great that we have these conversations, we have these platforms that we're able to share our lived experience, share some of our knowledge and expertise, like you both have, and to see it from different perspectives, like a youth perspective. So I know Cheyenne's got some questions that she wants to share, or some thoughts that she wants to share regarding technology. Over to you, Cheyenne.
Thank you. I just want to say, like, linking to what Sister Angela said about like the dispersed family and the effect, especially on elderly. And like me and my mom know, for an example, how her mom and my grandma is in Jamaica. Imagine her living alone. If it wasn't for my aunt living with her, maybe we wouldn't have that connectivity with her. So, for example, she wouldn't understand how to use her phone or use WhatsApp to FaceTime us. So so we have some good examples, positive examples of technology and the use of that in limiting or reducing loneliness, shall we say. But is there any negatives? For example, is technology pushing us away from each other, such as in like the workspace? How you mentioned before, how some people are very comfortable working at home and enjoy working at home. So is that like opportunity to choose or to opt from working at home, is that pushing us away from each other rather than choosing to work with each other? And what's the effect of that?
well, I think it's really good that you've pointed out that, technology and social media is not wholesale bad. There is some good stuff
Mm.
to be said about it, and you're absolutely right, Cheyenne. um, it helps, especially if you've got relatives in a different country to you, to do the video chats and things like that. But of course, yes, there's the negative side. And again, I mean, I enjoyed working from home. So I wanted to mention that, temperament also has a factors into how we cope as well. And as an
Yeah.
introverted person, definitely, I'm a bit like Cheyenne in that sense, balance between quite happy, maybe too happy sometimes in my own company. Um, and so I thought, yeah, lovely. And then we continue to work from home. And I'm like, thank God, long may it last. It's not that I don't like people. I do love people. But what I do, because even during the pandemic, I still went into the office once a week, because I knew there was one other person who was going in. Because you do need the interaction, you do need the social contact, right? Um, so definitely there's positives and then there's negatives around the social media thing. So even as we know the old story, which is the truth, 4 or 5 young people sitting in a room together, but they're not interacting in each
Mm.
other's presence. They're just on the phone. And in fact, sometimes they're texting each other on the phone as opposed to just speaking to each other. So,
Yep.
there's these extreme behaviors that you do wonder, what is going on and why is that happening? Why are they not just talking to each other? Why are they WhatsApping each other instead?
Mm. Mm.
I don't know.
You've
Yeah.
seen that as well, then.
Yep.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
So, and then, some of the stuff that happens on the social media, I think, is sometimes the bullying and I don't have children, to be honest with you. So I'm not all that in touch with what goes on with social media and young people. But every now and again, you hear something on the news, you know what I mean? And it sounds pretty extreme what is going on
Mm.
sometimes with young people
Mm.
on social
Mm.
media.
Yeah, I agree. And there was something that the video said about kind of materialism and and and
Mm.
and social media and the face. It's the face, how people look. It's the the glamour, the glitz, and I'm all I'm reporting on everything I'm doing on social media, and it gives the impression that someone's life is a certain way, but actually
Sure.
behind it, it's a totally different thing. And that's why when situations occur we're shocked about hearing about this person taking their life or something else, it's because what we see is the surface. We don't see the underneath. We don't see the real them. It's I'm doing this to fit in, and yeah, I'm happy, and I'll show you my outside face, but my inside face is you know I take everything off, and I'm alone. And do you understand? And no, and people don't want to show that side of themselves, and that's why we don't see it. That's the difficulty. You don't see loneliness. You don't see isolation. You just hear about it. After the event that this person. That's when you hear the things that we have experienced, recently around people being found at home dead for days and things like that. It's because of the
Mm.
fact that it was a norm for that person not to interact or engage with people sometimes. So the fact that we hadn't heard from them for 7 days, it wasn't unusual. Whereas if my kids don't hear from me every day, it's a problem.
Yeah.
They will phone me every day, and if they don't hear my voice, they hunting me down and ringing people that I know to say, "Have you heard from her?" Because because I suppose that's how it's important to them to know that I'm okay. But we don't have those same relationships across the board. It doesn't work like that. So for some, if I don't hear from you for a few weeks, it's okay and I'm talking about family now.
Sure.
Um, I remember being at work, and this is why work is so important for some people. I mean, during the pandemic, I had reports of people who, for working at home, it wasn't okay for them. Their actual home environment wasn't conducive to them actually being comfortable. And to be honest with you, I love working from home. I've done it for the last 3 years, and it's great for me. But I also appreciate the time that I spend with my staff when I go in. But I remember someone that was due to come into work, and I suppose that's the difference. Someone was due to come into work, and they didn't, and we didn't hear from them. And we could have just said, okay, well, they didn't come into work. But because I know that it wasn't the norm for that individual, I asked someone to go to her house to find out what had happened to her. Her neighbor said that they hadn't heard her and whatever. And in the end, the police got in and found her there. Now, she was alive, so that was a good thing. But she had, she'd hurt herself. Now, had it not been for the fact that we actually knew that it was out of the norm, it wasn't, you'd normally see a person, and the reason why I say give that example is because it's important for us. When we talk about being our brother's keeper, sometimes we are so quick just to ignore things, or we see someone looking down or whatever, and we say, oh, or they don't speak to us and we take offense as opposed to actually trying to find out if there's anything wrong. Sometimes we skirt over things quickly without actually trying to, or sometimes we ask people, how you doing? You okay? And before they've even answered, we're gone. We're looking at someone else. We're not actually waiting for the response. And sometimes when they want to come and tell us what the problem is, we're not engaged enough for them to actually feel that they can actually tell us that you know what, actually, I'm not okay. That's why now if someone asks me if I'm okay, I'm giving it to you. I'm telling you if I'm okay or if I'm not, or if I'm tired, or I'm going to let you know.
Yeah.
But sometimes people need to feel that they are able to do it. We need to give people permission to do it, So we need to be intentional when we ask someone a question. How are you doing? Are you okay? Let's wait for the response, and have a conversation and a dialogue, as opposed to, hi, you're all right. Okay, see you later. And you're gone. And that's why people, that's why people are not, we miss them off the radar. Because how many times sometimes the Sunday services, it's once a week that you see people and all you see is a hi and a bye. There's no interaction, no engagement. So that's why I think that, programs like this, for example, are really important for us to kind of normalize people's feelings and to say, it's not wrong to feel alone or to feel isolated, but it is important to do something about it, because if you don't, it can get to a chronic situation. And also those who are okay, so to speak, okay, do think about others, the person you haven't seen for a while, that even the government have realized that, there is a need for befriending services. They have volunteers who will call and chit and chat or something like that. There are clubs called Nita Nata, they recognize the need for, or the importance, let me say, of social interaction. And it's healthy. It's healthy to interact with people. It really is. So, so you ask the question, what can we do? I think, as I said, programs like this are important because we're starting to talk about it. We're starting to talk about the fact that actually, it is a problem. There are lonely people in this country. There are lonely people, and let's start with those that we can see. Let's start with our families. Let's start with those, who we can make a difference to, that we can actually do something.
Excellent.
Absolutely
Excellent
agree.
advice.
Absolutely agree.
That was a long
So
answer
the thing I would So not to undermine the good intentions of the government, but actually the only reason the government is getting involved is actually this is costing a lot. This costs a lot.
I know that, Michelle.
Listed me up. So I listed some of the health risks. It's expensive to treat heart disease. Stroke is a massively big bill for the NHS.
Yeah.
Depression, anxiety, mental health, Alzheimer's for social care is big bucks.
Yeah.
So the government, so that just says to us that if the government is actually doing something, wanting to do something about this, is because there is such a huge need for it.
Yeah.
It costs the taxpayer a lot of money, but underneath that, the need is what is driving these costs. So
there is a department of loneliness, Michelle.
a department of
Oh, wow.
In the UK government, there is a department of loneliness. So they recognize, so it's so stark that they have, I think it was Joe Cox, that thing that stemmed from the minister.
Oh,
From
the
Joe
killing of
MP,
that
yeah,
lady.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the
So
MP.
from that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so there's various things that one can do, really. I mean, I don't know whether I'm waiting for the uh, to be asked the question as opposed to leading the conversation now. What
no,
we
that's
can
all
talk
right.
about.
That's all right. That's all right.
No.
So yeah, so Angela made it, good points there in terms of what the government is doing around befriending services and the like. And then there are things like social prescribing, which
Yeah.
is rolled out across the NHS now, and you can access that via your GP practice. So
Mhm.
most practices have social prescribers, and what social prescribing is that they will have a conversation with you, carry out an assessment. What do you like? What do you don't like? What are the issues for you? What do you think's behind this loneliness or this social isolation? And try to hone in on what the issues are, and then they will prescribe things. So apart from whatever they might do with housing or some other agency, it's about they have these really long lists of community groups and social activities that are going on in your ward or your borough, from choirs that you could join.
Yep.
And some social subscribers will actually even go with you for the first couple of times as well. If you're so lacking in confidence that you don't want to go on your
Yeah.
own, you will have somebody to take you there until you settle in and so on. So the social prescribing does that to you. So they will work with with a person to say, oh, there's a cycling group. Do you like cycling? Da da da. They go through the list of work out what you would like, what you might enjoy, um, and then that's the prescription. So then they link you in with that group or whatever the case is. Um, but you don't. You can go through that route, or just go online and see if you want to do some social activities, what's going on in your events in your area. And like where I'm in Harrow, there's this long list of walking groups, and they're so organized that they'll tell you the walks are beginner level, intermediate level, so i.e. a bit of few hills here and there, or advanced walker where you're actually not quite going up Ben Nevis, but you're going up quite high. So they actually tell you, what level of walking you want to do, and from 45-minute walks to 2-hour walks or 3-hour walks. So there's all that, and it's online. And I remember back in the day, as I said, as a relatively newish immigrant and starting to go to church at Kensington Temple, I was lonely. And what I did was I started to volunteer at church. So I was volunteering in everything from KTGC, Kensington Temple Gospel Choir, to the publications department. I used to transcribe Pastor Colin Dye's messages. And that's how I built friends, got friends that I still have today. And that was back in like 1996, 97, right? So I made lifelong friends just by volunteering in the church. Um, and so you just have to be, and as you get older, you, and those friends of mine got married as well. So then that kind of left me in the lurch, because the friend I could ring up on spontaneously to say, let's go watch this movie, or let's go and eat something, or let's go and do something. They were now married, so it wasn't so easy. So now I find that as I go through different phases of life, I actually have to become very intentional about finding connections and maintaining connections and doing things and going out. And I'm not against going out on my own. I do a lot of going out on my own, actually. If somebody doesn't want to go, I haven't got somebody to go to, I will go on my own now and feel very comfortable doing that. So there's a range
So
of things
I
that
suppose, I
one
suppose
can do.
the key word that you've used there is intentional. I think
Yeah.
just out of purpose. And Cheyenne, I'm not quite sure whether or not you touched on about social media and whether or not social media plays a part in creating this environment of loneliness, or is social media a positive thing?
I was going to say, leading off what Michelle said earlier about like the example of like young people maybe being together but being on their phones together or texting each other rather than talking to each other, which is very true, I have to say. But you could ask, is social media, is it being like singled out as a profound risk of harm to kids? Are we so used to touching the screens rather than actually interacting with each other? Is that, especially with the ever-growingness of social media and of technology and digitalization, is that going to become more of a problem as we grow older?
Well, I
Yeah.
think that the thing the problem with that is relationship and connection is more than the sort of, I don't know, 20-word text message. I think we could lose our ability to actually share deeply in terms of our emotions and feelings and views, because we have gotten into the habit of doing the quick text, the quick, message like that. Because there's so much more beyond the, as I say, 20-word or whatever it is, WhatsApp message. We could lose the art of reading body language, lose the art of being able to work out facial expressions and all the other things that make up communication and connection and relationship with people. I think that is one of the risks there.
Yeah, and also because the government has highlighted that this issue around loneliness and the review that they carried out, of the 50% of the population that was highlighted, the majority of those people were between the ages of 16 to 24. So you could say that social media has had a part to play in that, because those age groups have hidden behind, the kind of social media and the phones and and not going out. I mean, when we were younger, we were 16 to 24, that was our height time of going out and being together and going to different places. But if what they're saying is that the highest, the highest proportion of those people who are reporting as feeling lonely are 16 to 24, then that is an issue. And so there
Yeah.
has to be something preventative before it does get to become an epidemic for our young people, because those young people will be going into their next phase with that feeling of isolation, which, as we know, we've already talked about, leads to the health issues, leads to the depression, leads to the mental health issues and the different health things like obesity and heart disease and all of those things. That's where it begins. It begins when you're younger. That's why, there are so many preventative things happening now. And the social prescribing that you're talking about, Michelle, I've heard so many people talk about actually getting free gym membership and things like that, because obviously it's been identified that they need something, and people are now probably talking, but they may not still be familiar with this word social prescribing. And I think definitely we do need to talk about that more, because it is social prescribing, and it's what it says. It's actually making us more sociable, because we can't ignore the fact that what the pandemic did was affect that greatly. It did, and it affected people in different ways, but it has had a negative effect.
Yeah, definitely. And so you mentioned obviously the effect of young people, and specifically mentioned 16 to 24, but
Yeah,
obviously it may start earlier. So what top tips
yeah.
can you offer parents possibly into helping to navigate discussions around maybe the excessive use of social media and like the impact of progressive social isolation?
Communication is the key. And I think in the busy lives that we lead, sometimes we forget how important communication is, particularly with our children, and positive communication and encouraging our children to speak. Yes, we know that children will go through adolescence, and they, to a certain extent, a majority of them will go for a period where they want to go to their room, they want to be alone, and all of that, and that's normal. But I think the relationship in the home, the communication, the explaining the boundaries, the barriers, and and the potential pitfalls as well. I think education is knowledge is power, and it's up to us really to educate each other in the home, educating about the pitfalls, because we see the damage that social media can do to top stars. in the media, let alone our children in the home. We know that one day you could be flavor of the month and out there, and the next minute, because of something that happens on social media, it can destroy your life. So I
Sure.
think that even at a very young age, we need to be communicating with our children and young people. And it isn't just about in the home, it's in every environment that they are in. And we cannot just rely on the fact that the school is going to do it for us, or that the college is going to do it for us, or the university. Because when you hit university, it's a whole different ball game. So it
Mm.
has to start from they are a very young age. I remember I said I'm not going to give my son a phone until he was a certain age, and he was so upset. It upset him so much, but I didn't want him to, in my view, grow up too quickly, because what that phone does, it gives you access to things that, unless you are technical as well, because some of us, as the older generation, let me say, we're not technical like these. My 2-year-old grandson will know that when he's on TV, and I've got something on YouTube, and an advert comes on, he looks at the little box at the right hand side that says skip ad, and he's pointed to it because he knows I've got to press that before the next thing happens. So, and he's 2. So I hear what you're saying about it's not about the 16 to 24s. We have to start younger, and I totally agree. We need to teach our young people how to communicate, and communicate effectively, face to face, not necessarily on a phone, but actually having a dialogue. So encourage them to talk when they come home from school. How's your day? What did you do? Let's talk. I don't think we do that enough, and I think maybe that's
Mm.
definitely one of the ways that we can help our young people to navigate through, and navigate, and actually, that balance between the phone, social media, whatever, and having those face-to-face conversations.
Yeah. Pastor Maxine, have you got any like practices that you use with your children in how to
I read the same book that Sister Angela read. So I did the same thing. My children weren't allowed to have those gadgets till they were later on. They were a little bit older in senior school. And yeah, I do set boundaries. For example, when we eat round the table, no phones. You know, dining room table is about conversation. Even if it's 3 of us around the table, doesn't matter. And yeah, you can get bullied and pressured into, oh, well, mum, it's only the 2 of us. Oh, well, mum, we're only having breakfast. Oh, well, and you have to have that sense of authority where, our job is to raise children to be a great version of themselves, and that they could be, they can go out there in the big wild world. And my job is to tool them well. And sometimes they don't like it, but I've got to be really adamant that I know what's best for them. Because if we're not careful, our children will, oh, mum, and it's only the
Mm,
once, and then the once comes 3 or 4 times, and then you find out that we're having Sunday dinner and everybody's on their phones and nobody's doing anything but eating and on their phones, and that's not going to
mm,
happen in my household. So I think
mm,
sometimes you've just got to be determined that if you think that is the best practice in your household, then you've just got to stand firm on it. And I do agree with you, Sister Angela. Just having those conversations nowadays, where you can say to your child or young people around you, let's just go and have a chat, let's go and have a coffee somewhere, or let's just go and have a walk. Me and my daughter often say, if she's going out somewhere, I say, I'll walk with you. And I just use and seize the opportunity to communicate with her. And she's probably
mm,
thinking, oh, mum, well, I could have been on my phone talking to my friends while I'm going into town and coming back again. But I just really wanted to kind of use that time to engage and connect. So yeah, be confident in the boundaries that you set for your children with social media. Don't make any
mm.
apologies for it. And yes, when they get older, there may be a line of negotiation, but until that time comes, it's non-negotiable.
yeah,
And
definitely.
also, what about play dates and having kids around your children's friends to over at your house, that they can just hang out there together, face to face, as opposed to, I don't know. I don't have children, as I say, but
Yeah, yeah,
when I grew
absolutely.
up in the
I'll
Caribbean, that's how it was. We were in and out of our,
yeah,
homes all the
yeah.
time. Really,
Yeah, I
it was
do
on our
everything
street.
and anything that I can to break that tie. of phones in the morning and phones in the evening. So, like most parents, my children don't go to bed with their phones. It's out in the common areas, and I have the control of the internet, so I lock it on and lock it off when time comes. So I still maintain those controls. And sometimes they don't like it, but they'll learn now that actually there are things that mum's trying to do to help them. So I will do, and I'll say no gadget day in the holidays. No gadgets. We've got games, we've got game boards, we've got movies. Let's have movie time. So I do kind of create that environment, which I think, again, sometimes get some pushbacks. But if you know it's what's good for them, then you have to stand your ground. So that's my contribution, Shay.
Thank you. So if we look at it with in a church setting, have you got any advice for effective pastoral care inside or outside the church setting?
I certainly think from the perspective of the elderly, we do need to pay particular attention to the potential isolation of our elderly brethren, and to do what we can to ensure that they can access, and I'm not necessarily saying just access services, but we can access them. So if they can't come out to church, for example, that we find ways to engage. I'm a strong advocate for that, because I feel that the older generation now are the people on which shoulders we stand, and I do feel that we should have a sense of responsibility to ensure that people are not isolated, and not necessarily assume that everyone's got family who's going to be rallying around them. Again, I remember that during the pandemic, there was a whole scheme of mutual aid, voluntary people that sprung up all over the country, and their role and responsibility was to make sure that people were okay, that those who were vulnerable, elderly, whatever, that they had what they needed. And I just feel that it's a shame that it seems that I don't hear much about it now that the pandemic is over. But during that time, we made sure that people had, that the elderly people had their shopping, had their prescriptions, were able to go out to doctor's appointments and things like that. And I think that really, church setting or otherwise, that we do need to try to maintain that. We have our church groups, whether they are, our cell groups, and though I think that's the space where, we can actually develop some kind of proper process around how we look after each other, irrespective of age, because I know that when I grew up in that environment from a young teenager, that environment cared for me, taught me also how to care for others. And so, so even now, people who I grew up with, who are elderly, I will make a point of keeping in contact if I can, or, engaging, because it's so important. And, I feel that, those are the preventative strategies that we can take to reduce isolation, to reduce loneliness. And it doesn't cost anything. It does not everything has a pound sign to it. It's about love. It's around what we should be doing, because that's what Jesus said. We are our brother's keeper, but that's what we're supposed to be doing naturally. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Okay, thank you. Sister Michelle, have you got anything to add?
I think within the church setting, the thing that I actually pointed out at my church recently, that yes, we've got the cell groups and we've got the Bible study and all that, and I enjoy all that. But I said to my pastor's wife, sometimes I just want somebody to go out with. So, you want to go out and socialize, doing something that is not necessarily Bible study or necessarily cell group. And I do have friends that I do that with. And she seemed quite interested, actually, because then she asked me out. We went out together after church one afternoon, and it was just lovely. Her and I just talked and talked, and we had lunch, and it was just lovely, socializing, getting to know each other. So I think cell groups and all that are good because it does bring the social interaction. And yes, you don't feel lonely. You come away from that feeling refreshed and all of that. But there's also the other aspect of, going out and about and getting to know people. The other thing I want to say, which has been my experience, my testimony, is that over the years, I've already highlighted, being an immigrant, friends come and friends go. I have discovered I ask God for friends. When I'm in a place where I'm thinking, well, where is everybody suddenly? I literally just start praying and asking God for friends. And I remind him what he has said in his word. It's not good for the man for man to be alone. I bring that before him. And remember, you said that. And look at what, I'm really feeling this way, that way. And then suddenly, you open your eyes and you realize, oh, there is someone, or somebody actually comes into your life and you have a friendship and it grows and you work with that and you build that relationship up, and it's fun doing that building of relationships. So ask God. Remember, God is our source of everything, and he created us in this way for fellowship and for friendship and for relationship and to be loved and understood. So ask him as your source to bring those types of people into your life, and he will deliver. He has done it for me again and again. The other bit is about learning to enjoy your own company. So even with the friendships, people can't be there for you 24/7. Okay, in the best of intentions, as much as they love you, there are going to be times when you are on your own, and you have to develop a friendship with yourself. Be your own best friend is what I've written in Do Great Exploits. Become your own best friend. You have likes, find out what they are. Pursue those likes. Pursue something that is of interest to you. London has got so much going on. Go out there and explore London. There's all sort of art places, museums, or anything you can think of London has to offer. Okay, but learn to enjoy your own company, even at home. If you don't enjoy your own company, how do you expect anybody else to enjoy your
Yes.
company? You know what I mean? It's
Point.
like, if you can't enjoy your own company, why should I enjoy it myself? So learn to enjoy yourself as a person, and it starts with
True.
love. I think that Vicky said that, learn to love yourself, learn to laugh
Yeah.
at
Absolutely.
yourself, learn
Yeah.
what your
Yes.
idiosyncrasies, your flaws, your faults, the good bits, the strengths as
Mm,
well, and
mm,
enjoy yourself, because then when you're with other people, they will also enjoy you because you are authentic and you're bringing your authentic
yeah.
self to the
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A great point there, Sister Michelle.
Yeah.
Really, really great. I just want to say thank you to our guests, Sister Angela and Sister Michelle. Just want to say thank you so much. It's been such a lovely evening. But just as we're starting to close, I want to give you the opportunity just to share either a final nugget or, a word of encouragement, or anything that you really feel that you could share with our viewers as we start to close. Sister Angela, can I start with you?
Yeah. I mean, I actually liked what Michelle just said, which is correct, that you do need to love yourself. But I would say that that if you are feeling a certain way, because as an individual, if you are feeling isolated or lonely, then it is important to do something about it. And as much as you may feel that it's difficult, I do think it's important to talk. There are, and if you can't, find a friend, find, and if your family, if you can't talk to your family, then find someone that you can relate to, that you can actually talk to, because that's the beginning, starting those conversations, just telling someone about how you're feeling. It's not about telling them your business, but it's about saying to you, you know what, I kind of feel quite lonely, or I feel like I need to get out a bit more, or and what Michelle said was correct. Yeah, well, we may say pray about it, but actually, you need to be intentional. You need to ask for what you want. The scripture says to write it down, make it plain, and you need to say, verbalize, say it out in the atmosphere, because as I tell you, it changes things. And we have to, there's a song that says sometimes you have to encourage yourself, and I have conversations with myself all the time, and I'm unapologetic about it. So I talk to myself. So it's almost as if I'm counseling myself, and sometimes, there is that voice, that where that says to you, oh, or you're going to be by yourself all the time, and this. No, I rebuke that in Jesus' name. I encourage myself. I encourage myself to smile. I encourage myself to look in the mirror and actually say, you know what? Thank you, God, for making me. Michelle is right. Unless you yourself, unless you can look at yourself and see what the beauty of what God has made, no one else is going to be able to do that for you. So it has to start with you. It has to definitely start with you. But don't suffer in silence. Try to talk, try to reach out. And as has already been said, there are so many different avenues that can support you. And even if you've got to start with your GP, just go to your GP, and the 10-15 minutes that they're going to give you, just talk about how you're feeling. And then you could have a conversation, and it starts from there. But don't do nothing, because I think that's where it leads to more destruction, if you just don't do nothing and you suffer in silence. So from today, do something different, do something intentional. That's my few words.
Thank you so much, Sister Angela. I personally have learned so much from your contribution this evening. I'm truly, truly blessed. So thank you. And what about you, Sister Michelle? What final nuggets or words of encouragement or instructions that you can add to what you've already shared with us this evening, that you can share with somebody, one of our viewers, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, pretty much I thought I was giving my nuggets back just then when I was saying, about loving yourself and learning to enjoy your own company and the like. And Angela summarized it all really well, actually. It starts with you, but also, you can step out as you develop your self-love. Um, you don't have to wait until you clinch it. You start working on other things. So you can see your GP, as I said, around the social prescribing, or you could just go online and see what's going on in your neighborhood, in your neck of the woods, and tap into some of that based on what you enjoy. Thinking about this morning, the scripture, Philippians 4:10-13, in the Amplified Bible version is what came to me. I won't read it out now because it's quite a long passage, even though it's just 4 verses, but I want people to go and look that one up, please. Philippians 4:10-13. That's where Paul is talking about, whether well fed or going hungry, whatever the circumstance, in all things, whatever is happening, my strength comes from God. I have strength for all things, well fed or going hungry. So even in loneliness or being surrounded by friends, you've got strength. Even in loneliness, you've got strength even when you've got friends around you. So just meditate on that. Basically, God is our source of everything. He says to come and ask him. He gives good gifts, and if you ask him for friends and for people in your life, he's going to give you good people in response to that. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you again, Michelle. Some real fine nuggets there. It's been a pleasure being with you both this evening. And then over to my co-host, and thank you so much, Cheyenne, for being with us. So do you have any nuggets and words of encouragement that you'd like to share with us?
First, I'd just like to thank you for having the opportunity to host this with you. It's been really interesting, really insightful, and it's been a pleasure talking to Angela and Michelle about this topic, because I've learned so much, and you really opened my eyes to other perspectives that I may not have thought of, and obviously your other opinions about this topic. But I just want to leave you with a final thought from me, maybe like a little, what I've probably taken away from this is that I was, obviously, as we've spoken before, about being in like this technological age and the dependence on technology with its contribution to loneliness, specifically among teens and young adults, with people possibly interacting with their devices more than they do with people. So my thoughts I've taken away from this are young people more comfortable not having that physical interaction and instead expressing it through the screens and through social media? And could this contribute to an amplified loneliness? Or do people believe that lonely people seek engagement on social media? And does that present a false sense of connectivity, as we've spoken about before? So to consider, does social media try to satisfy a craving to feel connected? And if so, how can we prevent this perpetual toxic cycle? And how maybe you guys as parents or grandparents, if you have children of young ages, like teenage ages or young adults? How may you possibly help your family members or people around you not fall into that loop and cycle of loneliness? So that's from me. Back to you, Sister Maxine.
Well, thank you, Shai. That sounds really, really wonderful. Just those reflective words has really made me even think a little bit more about the word that you did, so about toxic cycle. So we've got to be really, really careful. But thank you all again. I really, really appreciate the fact that you were able to join with us this evening. And thank you to our viewers for joining and staying with us this evening in Connect, discussing loneliness and isolation. So my few words and my few nuggets as we start to close down is really about checking yourself, and that's something that Michelle had alluded to. You know, have that self-check-in. Self-care is really important, and sometimes we're waiting for other people to see how we feel, or to discern how we feel, or to look at the signs and symptoms of how we feel. But I think most importantly, let's check in ourselves. Let us know how we feel, and doing that daily check-in, I think, is really, really healthy and really, really important, because when we're on our own, we can keep it real and we can be honest with where we're at. And so let's not wait for anybody else to check in on us and see that we're perhaps maybe a little bit lonely, maybe that we are constantly wanting to isolate ourselves from others, but just to take that time to do those check-in. There's times in our lives that we may find difficult. So I don't know where our viewers are. I don't know where our listeners are going to consider this theme, especially when we may focus on the things that we can't change, and perhaps not focus on the things that we can change. So I want to encourage you to leave the things that you can't change to God. Leave those things that you can't change to others that are able to impact those, but focus on the things that you can change in terms of your environment, in terms of the people around you, in terms of how you think about yourself. One of the positive things that I got from Michelle was about, how do you think about yourself? Do you love yourself? Angela said, I speak to myself, and I said, command myself to smile and be joyful. And I think those are the things that you can change. I want us to take a look, to look after ourselves, really be intentional. Our physical, our emotional, and our spiritual well-being is so vital and so important. And finally, look out for each other, even in a small way. Do whatever you can. Whether it's a smile. Sometimes when I go out to the stores and the shops and I interact with people, and if I see that there is a bit of a sullen face, I'll do my best to smile and bring a little bit of warmth. So do what you can. Maybe just a kind word could change where somebody's at. Maybe a written letter. When was the last time somebody wrote a letter to you? Maybe just a love letter to say how special you are. I have a couple of girlfriends that would often just send me a little card, and I call it a love letter, just to encourage my spirit, encourage me, to remind me that I am loved and I am the beloved. Maybe a text message or an email. It all counts, and it may lift somebody's spirit, even if it's just for a short time. I mean, we talked about the world and society, and we are more connected than we've ever been with social media and digitalization. But it can still be a very lonely place for some people, and we must not forget that. Modern technology and social media enables us to communicate with each other, especially with people that we may never have met abroad, in different countries and in different continents, to link up and share our lives with them. It's possible to have hundreds and even thousands of friends and followers all around the world, but are such friendships very superficial? And are they a poor substitute for the real thing? And the connectiveness glosses over the reality. Could it be true that many countries and societies are fragmented? And Michelle alluded to marriages and relationships that may not be broken down, but are broken. Maybe you can live in a household and still be alone. And there are many people that are living on their own. So any small thing that we do can make a huge difference in their lives. And on the other side, for those that enjoy solitude, it's not a problem. You know, I spent a lot of time working on my own in different parts of the country, and I got a good relationship with myself. I loved myself. I loved to be alone. I loved to enjoy my environment, even though it wasn't surrounded by lots of people. But for those that find themselves alone and lonely, it can be crippling. Let's not forget that. So, relationships, being fully known, understood, and loved, is at the heart of my faith and is at the heart of many of our faiths. So, what about you? Know that help and support is usually only a phone call away or a visit away. So take the time this evening just to reflect on what we've been able to share with you and reach out to somebody, reach out to a few people and just share the love that we are all called to share. And sometimes it may seem very insignificant what you do, but it can be a huge thing in their lives. So I just want to say thank you again for joining us. It's such a great pleasure to be working with you also. And I want to just give everybody an opportunity, especially if you're on a device. And if you ever see yourself, just kiss yourself for me. Every time you look in a mirror and you're putting your makeup on or you're doing your hair, just give yourself a kiss from us. Is that all right? That's good. So I'd like just to take us on to a few announcements, if that's okay, just as we start into close. And please remember that by all means, you can contact us. You can go back and look at this footage again on our Facebook account, on our Twitter account, and on the website and on our Instagram. Please do comment, share a thought, tell us how this series has impacted you. Share with us the reflection of this evening. That would be really, really great. Please keep adding things on the chat. It'd be great to understand and to know how this has helped you. And I'd also like to encourage you to next month, when we've got another Connect series, invite a friend. Doesn't have to be anybody that's saved, just a friend, because there's lots of nuggets that we share during this series. And I also would like to remind you and invite you to the Platinum Jubilee Convocation and AGM taking place in October. The weekend starts from Thursday, the 19th of October, and it continues on to Sunday, the 22nd of October. It's going to be an amazing week of celebration and Thanksgiving, not a chance to be missed. So please make sure that you get your bookings and register as early as you possibly can. And I look forward to seeing you at that event. So thank you again. And we're just going to close out with a wonderful song that's sung by one of our leading ministers. And it's great to understand and to know that God is on our side. If nobody ever told you that today, God is on our side. And even when you don't feel him, even when you don't sense him in your circumstance, in your situation, he is there and he's fighting for us. Never forget that. So I'd like to just say a final good evening to you all as we close with this song, The Goodness of God. Good night and God bless. And remember, reach out to somebody.
Love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been good, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in the darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been good, so belongs to